Welcome to the Kickstart podcast, where we highlight the stories of how professionals kickstart and navigate their very, very successful careers. My name is Preston, and on this episode, we have the pleasure of hosting a successful author, journalist, speaker, educator, and founder. She created a world-famous media arts program at Palo Alto High School, served as vice chair of Creative Commons, international nonprofit that empowers people, and has also been called by many as a godmother of Silicon Valley. Esther, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for that great introduction. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to be listened to by your listeners. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and the feeling is mutual. So we did our best to give you an intro, but I guess for people in our audience, Esther, who don't know who you are, who might be unfamiliar with your background, would you mind just sharing a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So I started out as a journalist, and then because of the situation in the 1960s and 70s for women journalists, where basically I was banned from the press club in San Francisco because women weren't allowed, I decided that a more sort of friendly way for me to be a journalist was to be a teacher. So I ended up being a teacher of journalism. And I started at Palo Alto High School in 1984 with about 20 kids in the program. And since I love journalism, I think that I radiated that to the kids. And also I changed my teaching style, very different than what everybody else was doing. I decided that it was better for them to work collaboratively in little groups than it was for me to lecture the whole class period, because not only were they bored, I was also bored with myself. So I switched it around, and it turned out that worked. And more kids came into the program. They heard from their friends that they wanted to be, journalists, or maybe just have fun and learn the techniques of being a journalist. And so gradually over the years, the program grew. And by the time it was 1999, the program was at 100 kids in the program. And 100 kids with one teacher is just a little bit much. So I looked around for another teacher, and of course the administration didn't think that was a great idea, since of course you have to pay teachers. But the magazine that I started that year, together with my students, I had a newspaper, and then we decided to start a magazine too, won first place in the country from Columbia University. And so there's nothing like an award to get the administration very excited and interested in you. So of course they said, you can hire another teacher. Wonderful. So that's the beginning of the program that grew until today. Actually, every 2 years in 2000, 2002, 2004, so forth, I started another publication. And today there are 12 publications at Palo Alto High School and 5 other journalism teachers. And it grew to be the number one in terms of size and probably quality as well, journalism program in the country. And it's all student directed. And so they learn a lot of skills, the skills that I was particularly focused on, which is collaboration, critical thinking, communication, and creativity. Those are the ones that I focused on, and happy to say that it worked out, and it's still working out. And there's like thousands of kids that have gone through the program. So that's a little bit of background about me. Oh, I think I'm an author. I wrote 2 books, one of which is an international bestseller called How to Raise Successful People, Simple Lessons for Radical Results. And it's literally in 28 languages around the world. And I also am a co-founder of a startup called Tract.app, TRACT.app. And the goal of Tract was to encourage peer-to-peer project-based learning. At the moment, it's taking a break. We're trying to reconceptualize the best way to do that in light of some of the latest trends in education. And so it'll be resurfacing sometime this spring. And so that's takes up a lot of my time. In between 2000 and today, 2023, I was involved in a lot of other organizations because my goal has been to empower kids and to help them succeed in any way that they decide they want to succeed. So I've been very supportive of, entrepreneurs. If you want to be a doctor, that's great. If you want to be a lawyer, that's great. If you want to be an entrepreneur in an area where there aren't any other people, fine, that's great too. I just try to give them the opportunity to work on projects that they like and feel strongly about. So that's a summary of what I've done. Was there anything else? I mean, I might have left out quite a bit, to be honest.
It's quite an impressive summary at that. I want to ask you, what is your biggest tip and advice when it comes to just managing your time? You're working on so many amazing initiatives. You're engaged with so many different types of companies and organizations. How do you prioritize? How do you manage your time for someone who's seeming like doing so many things at the same time? How do you still have energy for yourself, let alone sanity?
Well, my vocation is sort of my avocation. So it melds together. I love what I do, and I spend a lot of time doing it. I guess the main thing I don't do, I'm not a really great spectator. So I don't watch sporting events, and a lot of people do. I don't watch a lot of movies. I'm very picky when it comes to movies. I like really good movies or, documentaries, things that where I can learn something about life or about the person or something that I think is realistic. I do like comedies as long as they're they're well done. I don't like the kind of crazy slapstick comedies. So I think the time that other people do that, I devote to what I'm doing, to my interests and the companies that I like to work with and people I like to work with. So I have more time in that area. And then the other thing, I was trying to figure out what else I do. And that is that first, I don't sleep very much. I sleep 6 to 7 hours the most. And also, I tend to eat, I'm kind of a vegetarian, vegan type of person. So I eat a lot of raw food. So preparation times are not very long, right? Just take the carrot out of the refrigerator and eat it. And so, because I know that my husband, on the other hand, he loves all this preparation. So, he can spend like 2 or 3 hours preparing something. And like I said, I spend 5 minutes getting out of the refrigerator and making it. So that's where I get a little bit more time. But I'm really passionate about the projects I'm involved in, which is everything relates in one way or another to education. Because I think the young people and the way that we educate them determines the future of the country and the future of the world. And so I want to give them the best opportunities to be the most productive and the happiest. Because I think happy people do the most for the world. I think depressed and unhappy people, I think we need to help them figure out what it is that's going to make their world better. But I know there are a lot of really unhappy people today. I think it's primarily because of the unfortunate epidemic that we've all faced for the last 3 years and all the tensions between, countries. I mean, this crazy war in the Ukraine and this tension between the US and China, which I think is unfortunately I feel it's somewhat fabricated, to be honest. I was kind of shocked that the administration somehow seemed to think that China was an enemy. I mean, I personally love China. And I've also always been very impressed with Chinese philosophy and a lot of the books that come out of China. And I guess I started this when I was a child. I was reading a lot of novels that were based in China and Pearl Buck novels, in case you had ever heard of them. But I guess that might have influenced me. And then also I went to China about 5 times. So, and I've gone to many of the countries in Asia, including Vietnam and Korea, Cambodia, all of those countries. And I enjoyed them all a lot. And I think Americans love their food. So they should spend some more time reading about the culture because it's pretty interesting.
That's really good to hear. Now, what I'm kind of fascinated by is for someone like yourself that started her early career in journalism. Quick question to that. Where did that come from? Have you always wanted to be journalist, or what about journalism really attracted you? And then from there, what was the catalyst? What was the tipping point for you to change your life mission or purpose? That whatever you pursued up until that point, moving forward, it's all about the betterment and the empowerment and the cultivating of the younger generation. Like, where did that come from?
So going back, I think, where did I start? So I grew up. My parents are immigrants. My father's from the Ukraine and my mother's from Russia, from Siberia, and so we grew up with actually no money. Or I did. And I was always hungry, always looking around for, opportunities and so forth. And when I was about 14 years old, I realized that, one of the most influential groups in the country were the journalists. And, just from reading newspapers and just being aware. And I decided that I wanted to try it. I wanted to be a journalist. So I applied to a local newspaper that was a weekly. And since the price was right, I was very cheap. They hired me and they paid me 3 cents a word. So as you can imagine, it was a real bargain for them. But for me, it was a great experience because they taught me how to write and to write all the journalism types of stories. And they did it. I think in some sense it was self-interest. It was a lot of work to go to all the city council meetings, all the local high school games, all the activities that they covered. But they could send me for 3 cents a word, and that was a real deal. So it was great for them, but it was also great for me. And I entered a profession where there weren't any women. I mean, I was just a girl Friday more than anything else. And I loved it. It turns out that I had a knack for writing, which I didn't even know. And it was exciting to work with these people and exciting to see my name in print. And so I started that, as I said, at 14, and I graduated from high school at 17. So I did it for 3 years. And in the meantime, so the first year I worked for the local weekly called Sunland Tahunga Record Ledger. And then the second year, a local newspaper in Glendale, the Glendale News Press, which doesn't exist anymore, decided to hire me to be a teenage columnist. And I was like, wow. And they paid a little bit more. I think I got $10 a column, which was a big deal for me. And then, not to be outdone by the local papers, the Los Angeles Times hired me the following year to write about teenage news. So I was pretty excited about this. And I wanted to be a journalist because I saw what influence they had and how important it was to help people understand what was really going on and not what they just heard snippets about. So when I went to college, I went to UC Berkeley. I majored in political science and English. And those were basically to just hone my skills, political science to understand how societies were constructed, and then English because I loved English literature. But as a graduate student, I got a master's in journalism. And then I decided I wanted to be a full-fledged journalist. Well, why not after I got this degree? But as I mentioned, the profession at that point was only men. There was a club or an honorary society for men, Sigma Delta Phi, I believe it was, only let men in. And then also you could get into the press club. The newspapers, they were willing to hire me, but only for one section. The newspapers used to be divided into 4 sections: news, opinion, sports, and women's section. There was a whole section of the paper that was just devoted to women. And it was articles about babies and marriage and cooking and cleaning and I don't know, things like that. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to write for the women's section. But I got stuck writing household tips for the women's section. Anyway, this was not my idea of what I wanted to do as a journalist. So I didn't continue in that. And I decided, why don't I just teach? I'll teach journalism to all these young kids. And so that's how I ended up teaching at Palo Alto High School and starting that journalism program. Because I said, well, I can teach you all the skills, I can have an exciting life. I don't have to just concentrate on babies and house cleaning and things like that. I can make a change. So once I started there, I really liked it. And every year I got more and more students. And turns out I loved working with young people. And so I'm still here doing it, although I'm also a journalist now. I've written for the Huffington Post for years. And then I also write for Thrive Global, Ariana Huffington's latest website. And then I wrote 2 books, and I'm thinking of writing a third one. So, I've kept my journalism skills alive, and I've been very happy doing it. And I think it was luck that I went into teaching journalism.
Mm.
I've had a really positive impact on thousands of kids, and that makes me very happy.
I think that would make everyone proud. That it's quite a feat and very respectable that you've done that. Now, my question is, and it's really also really cool that you did a full circle back to journalism. You started journalism, you gave that up to teach, and now you're doing journalism again. Where did this desire to build that program come from? Did it just take off and became a life of its own, or after you saw the impact, the positive feedback that you gotten from maybe the early students, it kind of empowered you, got you excited more, like, you know what, this could be bigger than what it is now. Because I'm sure when you first started to where it is now, being able to have hundreds and hundreds of students go through that program to now being kind of nationally recognized. My question to you is, did you want to build this into something, or did it kind of become organically a life of its own that just took off and you just did whatever you could to kind of guide it? Or did this kind of inspiration to build something, did that come from your parents, or did you have other experiences previously, aside from your kind of day jobs as a journalist, to see something, take an idea into something, and take that something into something much larger than when it first started?
What it really was is I wanted to help kids and people be able to think and not be conned into all sorts of things, and not to fall for all these things that I called propaganda techniques, because a lot of people, unfortunately, don't believe in themselves and can't think. And, growing up as poor as I was and realizing that people were throwing around titles and all sorts of like prestige like things, and then they wanted you to believe them and follow them and do what they said. I had that goal early on, that I wanted people to be able to think for themselves. And I had, unfortunately, a tragedy in my life that precipitated this type of thinking. So when I was about 10, I had two younger brothers, and my youngest brother ate a whole bottle of aspirin without knowing it. He was only 18 months old. And my mother, being an immigrant and also being fearful of asking too many questions, called the doctor, who clearly wasn't listening to her. And, he was kind of irritated, I think. And he gave her the wrong instructions. He told her to put him to bed and wait to see how he is in a few hours. And she did. She never questioned him, and of course he died, because, you don't put a child that ingests poison to bed and wait and see what's going to happen. And I was 10 at the time, and it had an incredible impact on me. And the impact was that I don't care what your title is. I don't care what you've done in this world. If whatever you say makes no sense, I'm not going to do it. And so that sort of gave me this motivation to want to help people not get conned, not follow instructions that didn't make any sense, not do things that they just did because somebody who was more powerful told them to do it. And that, this was not on the conscious level, by the way. This is all subconscious. I just felt that journalism, the way that was created, was sort of able to represent the underdog. You could take their story and you could promote it. Maybe they couldn't protect themselves, but maybe you could help protect them. So it's sort of all tied together in my mind as a way to help people live better lives, think independently, not get, pulled into all kinds of crazy schemes, or not told things that might end up causing them injury. So, and I was only 10 at the time, so I clearly didn't think this through long term. But if I look back and think about what I did, I realized that really had it was the most impactful thing that happened to me.
What were, I guess, the other teachers at that time, or from your experience, what were they doing differently you referenced, propaganda techniques. Like, was it the manner in which like your colleagues were teaching the content that you perhaps disagreed with, or maybe you did it? How were you different in terms of like the delivery of your instructions and teaching compared to like what was done at that time that kind of separated yourself?
I think the main thing that I did was that I let the kids ask questions and challenge me. Just think about the number of teachers that are willing to let that happen. Teachers let nothing happen. And even today, teachers in total control. If the student doesn't agree with what the teacher says, that's just too bad. You memorize it and you regurgitate that on the test. And mine was very different. I wanted kids to be able to ask questions and to think for themselves and to challenge me if in fact what I said didn't make any sense. And I don't, most teachers I don't really know too many teachers except the other journalism teachers at Pali now. And there's also teachers at High Tech High in San Diego, which is a big school situation that allow students to actually challenge you and say, well, why do I have to learn that? And what is better about your method than my method? And so I think the kids are the ones that were the advertisers for my program. I never advertised. They brought in their friends, and there were more friends and more friends. And, gradually, as I said, by 1999, it was 100 kids. But, by 10 years later, it was already 300 kids. And, today there are between 700 and 800 kids involved in this program. And the other teachers in the program teach the same way. They allow themselves to be challenged. The program is really run by the students with the teachers as coaches. And I use this analogy, it's kind of like a football game. The coach does not play the quarterback. The coach coaches the quarterback. And so you want in the classroom, you want the teacher to be more of a coach, because when you play the game and you're the quarterback, you learn how to do it really well. And if the teacher does it, then you don't learn how to do it well. And so that's been always my philosophy. And again, that I think it relates back to that tragedy in my childhood. I want to give people the courage to ask those difficult questions, because honestly, there are a lot of people out there, I don't know if you heard of the story, the emperor has no clothes. Well, there's a lot of emperors out there with no clothes and people afraid to say it. So that's what I try to give kids the opportunity to ask those questions. Why do you have to learn this stuff? If there's no good reason, well, then maybe you shouldn't be doing that. Maybe you should be doing something else. We all have a fixed amount of time here on this earth, and how we use it, should be personal, should be something that makes you feel like a better person, or you enjoyed your life, whatever it is that you like. There's not one perfect thing to like.
I think this is a wonderful segue to quickly just touch upon the conversation regarding parenting for the audience. Of course, in addition to all of your widely accolades, you are also just very, very respected as just a wonderful, successful mother as well, right? With children who reached fantastic levels of success from society standards. And so I'm sitting here listening to your just principles on how you were different versus other colleagues in terms of how you're teaching, giving your students an opportunity to have that space to think critically, to ask questions, and reminded me of just a lot of the articles that I read about you with your perspectives just on parenting, and how there's a lot of similarities between how you think perhaps parents should parent, or maybe the mistakes that the parents do today versus like what you also did as an educator, as a journalist. So my question to you is, were you also raised by your parents in a similar way? Because a lot of people it's say in a very cliche manner that you can never be ready for parenting, right? And most people just resort to their default on how they were raised, to hoping that they can basically copy that same almost DNA and kind of raise their own children. So were you raised in a very similar way, or by the time maybe you had your first child, you're like, you know what, I'm very intentional in how I want to raise my child, and that's exactly kind of what happened?
I think it's the latter, the second one, because my parents, my father was from the Ukraine, as I mentioned, my mother from Siberia. So their idea of parenting was very Russian. And the Russian parents are in total control. I mean, they reflect the society. And the philosophy there is spare the rod, spoil the child. So there were a lot of their idea of if you did something wrong, you got beaten up for it. I wanted to make sure that that never happened to my children. And one of the reasons that I managed to stop all this, corporal punishment, which my father thought he was doing me a favor by doing this, is that I'm very tall. I'm 5'10". And I was this height at the age of 13. And, all the other kids are just starting to grow. And I was already this giant. And my father was only 5'7". So guess who managed to get him to stop hitting me? I was bigger. So it was over that part of my childhood. I didn't like being this tall, for a woman in my era. I didn't see any other women that were this tall. I mean, I grew up in Los Angeles, and I never met anybody else that was that tall until I went to Berkeley, UC Berkeley, and somehow miraculously there were some taller women there, which made me very happy. And then I discovered by accident that tall women were sought after as models, and I was like, oh, really? What a great idea. And it also paid really well. So I ended up being a model for about 4 years, 3 or 4 years, until then I got married and my husband thought it was not a good idea. But yeah, that was a little bit about my background on why I did not want to replicate my parents' parenting techniques. So when my daughters were born, my number one goal was to empower them. That was it. I had there were no books out. There was nothing for me to read. There was no internet. The books were just Dr. Spock, who I thought was great. And I read his book, but it was primarily concerning like what to feed your child and how to take care of diaper rash and things like that. But so I just thought to myself, I want my kids to think independently from the day they're born. And that's what I worked on. And they were very independent little children. And then they continued that way all the way through school. And of course, today you see what they're doing. They're independent thinkers. And I don't think that you get independent thinkers like that unless they start out, early. Because if you try to be a really independent thinker when you're, I don't know, in your 25, 30, 35, you have all these tapes playing in your head from your parents or from some other people that were involved in your upbringing telling you, you can't really do that. And I don't like those tapes. And I try to erase them for people that I work with. You can do what you set your mind to do. It's more of a mindset than anything else. And for people that, if you ski by any chance, your mindset when you're skiing determines how you're going to slide down that slope, whether it's on your butt or it's on the skis. And it's all in the mindset. So that's part of what I was thinking when I was raising my kids. I want them to have a mindset that says, I can learn how to do it and I can do it well, no matter what. And that's what they do.
I can actually relate to that because as you can see, I'm Asian. My family's Korean, and my parents very much raised me quite old school too. I think there's a lot of similarities between old school Asian parenting and even Russian. And it's very much like, parents are the authority. You can't really question the parents. It was very difficult to just say no, just to my parents. If we disagree, we just had to either stay silent or just go on with it. And one of the unfortunate side effects or consequences of that is as I got older, I realized that the muscle in my mind to be able to think critically, I felt was underdeveloped relative to people in my same age group who had the ability to think critically, be able to speak their mind. And so by hearing kind of your experience, for example, like with your father, like I can totally empathize and relate to that a little bit. And it's something that I actually had to be very proactive in my life to really proactively develop that muscle with intensity, so I can kind of catch up to my peers and be able to kind of develop that. Because as you know, being able to just think for yourself is a privilege, but it's also something that is very, very important when it comes to just life with your personal life, friends and family, or obviously professionally. And so it's something behind the scenes I just had to really actively work on. And still, in certain aspects, I feel like it's challenging for me to completely kind of autonomously think for myself. It's still, I find myself, even after multiple decades, to kind of unprogram everything. So I think, and thank you so much for sharing like deeply personal stories. And I just find it very admiring that when it comes to like your intentional decision to raise your kids in one way, it's very easy to see your story optically or from articles, and then to think, wow, Esther, she might have maybe just lucked out, or she just kind of lucked out with her first child, and then in retrospectively she's like, okay, maybe that's the right way to right way to kind of parent, and then maybe duplicate that for your second, third, and beyond. But to hear that it was a very intentional thing, I think that's really, really admirable, because thinking it is one thing, but also seeing it through and executing on that successfully multiple times is equally as amazing. So I just wanted to share that with you, and it also just means something to me on a personal basis. So I just found that just very insightful. So I just want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you for telling me and for sharing that. Just this last fall, I gave a talk in Korea and talked about how the Korean education system could be more welcoming to kids and not as critical. And so I addressed some of the problems that I have seen in the Korean education system, including these hagwons that need to be eliminated as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, the talk was very successful. Fortunately, people really liked it. And it was carried literally all over Korea. I mean, it was in 130 Korean publications. So I think a lot of people got it. I'd like to see if hopefully it has impacted, the way Korean kids are educated, because there's a lot of really miserable kids over there. So I want them to be happier.
Me too. Me too. What do you see is the future of just education and where everything's going, Esther? Like, I know education in America is broadly different from Korea, but we're kind of, I feel like, just on a high level reaching some sort of just precipice on a general consensus of people just being more critical of academic institutions and universities, their role in society. For someone who is all about empowering the next generation, do you still think like the old way with basically preschool through college is still kind of the best way? Or there's no right or wrong answer here, but I'd love to kind of just pick your brain. Like, where do you see everything going? Or in your opinion, if you were to have a decision or have some sort of an opinion on that, like, what would it be?
So the question really is, where do you see the American or the world education system at the moment? I'll concentrate on the US. Well, I would say that at this particular time, the US is gripped by fear in the education system, because the report came out in the New York Times in October that American kids were 2 years behind because of the pandemic. And as a result of that report, every school in this country pretty much got rid of everything that did not focus on math and reading, and forced kids to do more math and more reading, like they could catch up 2 years in 1 year or 3 years even. I think that that's misintended, poorly thought out. They shouldn't have done that. It's just too much stress on the kids. So they've cut out things that are important to kids, like art and music and PE, and focus more on these language skills and math skills. And it's gotten to be more like the hagwons, actually, only it's in school. And so you have to ask, how happy are American kids now with this? And the rates of depression are the highest they've ever been. So perhaps it's not such a good idea. So if they're 2 years behind, so what? They're going to catch up eventually. So that's, I think, my evaluation at the moment of the school system. I would like to see a more empathetic, relaxed view and see whether or not kids can't want to read on their own without being forced to read, and understand the power of doing math well, and then want to do that. That's what I would do if I, were in the classroom at the moment. I have 10 grandchildren, and we focus on exactly what, I just talked about, giving them the opportunity to work on things that they care about. And so if they're a little behind, well, next year maybe they won't be behind. And just because you're behind now doesn't mean you're always going to be behind. So yeah, I really wish that I could help those teachers, because the teachers are really stressed. They are stressed because they think their kids aren't doing well enough, and the kids are stressed and the parents are stressed. And it's like, so I think one of the things we need to look at is one of the happiest countries in the world, or the happiest group of countries in the world, are the Scandinavian countries, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Finland. And the countries that score, the one country that scores the highest on the PISA test, which is the Personal International Student Assessment Test that compares one country to the other, is Finland. Finland, it ranks at the top, number one. And what's interesting about that is it also ranks at the top in happiness. So how could that be? Well, it turns out that happy kids and happy people learn the most. When you're cold, when you're hungry, when you're fearful, you don't learn. You just want to get out of it. And kids that are unhappy or feel like they're not doing well or feel bad about themselves have a harder time learning. So, it just makes sense. You should just try, the parents, try to learn something. Try to learn a few phrases in French while you're hungry or while you're miserable. See how well you do. But I'm telling you, we need to stop doing that to our kids. We need to give them an opportunity to feel good about themselves, and then present reading as an opportunity to communicate. No one can do anything well unless they can read. So this new AI feature that has just come out, Chat GPT. Okay, all the school districts are very frantic about this. But let me tell you, you cannot even do Chat GPT if you can't read. Or if you can't do any math. So, it's a motivator. It could help kids want to learn. And so, we could probably spend another hour talking about Chat GPT. So maybe we can do that for another session. But I do have some ideas on how we can incorporate it in a way to make it productive. I also remember, so I've been around for a while, as you know. I remember when calculators came out. And the schools all banned calculators. If you carried a calculator into school, you're going to get into trouble. And now nobody cares. It's built into your phone. And so, but all these new devices that are coming out, we need to learn how to live with them, not ban them. Because, New York City public schools just banned Chat GPT. So I would like all those people that just banned it to think about how successful prohibition was. So that's kind of an interesting thing. What did they have to do? They banned all the alcohol. Well, anyway, banning doesn't work. Working with the product or whatever it is comes out as a better alternative, as a better way to work with it.
I'm really glad you brought up Scandinavian Nordic, Esther. My wife's actually half Finnish. So I know a lot about Scandinavia and Nordic, specifically the differences of way in life, about infrastructure, just parenting, education. We can talk about hours and hours of this stuff. I know education, there's a huge difference from just how people view and value educators and teachers. They're some of the most well-paid professionals in Finland versus in America, where it's the opposite, unfortunately, to how they run the curriculums and how there's no forced homework every single day for kids, and how school gets out much earlier than schools in America. So I can totally connect with a lot of the things that you're saying. Do you ever see a future where the educational system, as is right now, will evolve in America, or is it one of those stubborn things that's just going to stay the same for the test of time, you think?
Well, I am working fervently on changing it so it's more like the Finnish education system. I think teachers need to be paid more. They need to be respected. They need to be given autonomy in the classroom. Instead of being told what to do, scripted education runs absolutely the opposite of giving teachers autonomy in the classroom. I don't know if you know what scripted education is, but for your listeners, what the textbook companies do is they put out a curriculum for every subject for an entire year at every grade level. And so if, let's say, for example, you're in, grade 6 and reading and math and social studies and whatever, the teacher knows exactly what page she's supposed to be on every day of that school year, teaching the same thing that the classroom next door is teaching. They're all teaching the same thing at the same pace. Why is that? Well, so parents won't say, well, my kid got the best teacher, because all the teachers are the same. They're all teaching the same thing at the same time. So that's the motivation behind that scripted education. And I think it's not a good idea, because as a teacher, I can tell you, some classes understand things faster than other classes. You want to individualize. You want to solicit ideas from your students. You don't just constantly want to be telling them what to do all the time. So anyway, we can, like I said, I'd be happy to spend another entire hour with you.
Well, one more follow-up, actually. Do you think maybe homeschooling can be a good solution?
That's an interesting idea. So I would say, if I'm going to give you a simple answer, I would say sometimes, but I would say most of the time it is not a good idea. And the reason is because a lot of parents are not as patient they could be or they would be if they're teaching someone else's child. There's something about your own child and teaching them to do something that when they fail, it's almost like you failed. It becomes very personal and emotional. And that's what the teacher can do. The teacher can repeat over and over again and help that child understand it, whereas the parent gets a little bit more irritated when the child doesn't do well. I haven't seen really positive outcomes in homeschooled children, but maybe my sampling is smaller. In Palo Alto, I got a few of the homeschooled kids, and I would say the main problem they had was they had a harder time interacting with larger groups because they didn't have that experience. So that's not to discourage people that want to do homeschooling. It's just to enlighten you. If you do want to homeschool your child, you have to beware of this thing that we all have, which is like you get upset too much if your child doesn't do well. So you just have to guard against it. And I mean, the very first teachers that a child has are the parents. You are your child's first teacher. And so there are some distinct advantages.
So for perhaps educators or parents that are listening right now, Esther, who are vibing and resonating and agreeing with your message, and of course equally impressed as I am for what you've done, like what is one advice you would like to give them for, I guess, what would be your biggest tip for their kids, the biggest tip for their students, and how would they actually go about maybe putting down the first couple stones to actually give the kids and students a space to be able to think critically or be able to communicate critically, or in like a freely manner?
So, in my book, How to Raise Successful People, I have an acronym that I developed together with some of my students to explain what I did in my parenting and what I did in my teaching. And the acronym is TRICK. And TRICK stands for trust, respect, independence, collaboration, and kindness. And I say you should trust, your child as much as you can. Stop doing it for them. Let them do it. Respect their ideas, no matter how wacky they are. Give them the respect of at least listening to what they're saying. Give them as much independence as you can without, they don't want to hurt themselves. You're not going to let your 4-year-old walk out on the street alone. But you can let your 4-year-old run around the library and pick their own library books. Collaborate instead of dictating. In other words, instead of saying, I'm going to take your phone away, work with them and say, we should all have dinner together and we should all be present. Nobody should be on their phone, because then you're not present. You're not here with all of us at the dinner. So you have to collaborate with your kids so you're not just laying down laws and then forcing them to do it without understanding. So collaboration is really an effective way to do it. And, kids, if you talk to them and respect them, honestly, they can be very sensible. And then the last one is kindness. Most people forget what you said and what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And, if you're doing something with your child and it's a problem, they won't remember the event, but they'll remember how you made them feel. So it's really important to always treat your child with kindness, even if they make mistakes, no matter what they do. You should listen, communicate, and then, go from there. And that's what I did with my own children. And that's what I do with my grandchildren of 10. And there's some stories in my book about what I did with my grandkids. So if anybody's interested, the book's available. It's on Amazon and it's in Kindle format, and you can listen to it Audible format or paperback. It's like every format out there is what the book is in. And it's also, like I said, in 28 languages. If you want to get it in Ukrainian, it's in Ukrainian. You can get it in Finnish. It's like everywhere. So whatever language you speak, it's in that language. Well,
what would you say to parents who are afraid that if they gave their child more independence, that the child won't do well maybe in a test, exam, or homework? Maybe they would make the wrong decisions, or is that just part of it?
No, in other words, you are like the coach on the field. You are coaching your child, but you're not forcing them and you're not telling them what to do. Sometimes one of the best things a child can learn is failure. And if they learn what it's like to fail, maybe they won't want to do that again. If you're always preventing this from happening, they might not understand it completely, what it really means. Like, honestly, if kids don't do well, kindergarten through 10th grade, no one looks at their test scores or their grades in elementary school, middle school, first 2 years of high school. All colleges are just looking at 10 and 11 and 12, or just 11 and 12, actually. So if you give them that opportunity to control their own studies early on, and if they can do it in a way where they learn to control it themselves, that's probably the best. I was just two of my grandsons, actually, both of whom are at really good colleges. I remember my daughter saying, they never remembered to turn in their homework. They did it. It was at the bottom of their backpack. We're so disorganized. But, eventually they learned. And they did fail a few times. But, now they're fine. So I think it's just important for people to have faith. If your DNA is pretty good, by the way, guess what? Your child inherited your DNA, and they're probably going to be pretty good too. So I think you can try it out. Try it out when they're little and see how it works.
What about for young people, or especially maybe women or young women in the audience that are listening, for someone who had a very successful career early on when you started in journalism. I'm sure it was very difficult working in a male-dominant industry at that time. I'm sure there are moments where you really want to quit. And then even as you kind of progress throughout your career, whether you're educating or starting businesses or a lot of things, I'm sure you went through a lot of difficult moments as well. So for the times when you felt like you could quit or you experienced failure, like what is one advice that you can share to the audience, or specifically the women in the audience who to help them, push forward, fight against their fear, to break that glass ceiling? And any big advice or tips from your experience?
Well, the main thing, number one, is you have to realize you're not alone. It happens to everybody, even though they don't admit it. And all that social media with everybody looking so happy. Does anybody do social media when they are sad? We're all sad. And we all have problems. And so the idea is to figure out how to manage the situation that you're in. I mean, it's tough. And I, especially being a young woman or a woman, a single parent, male or female, it is hard, but you have to keep your eye on the goal and continue to work through it. I think Sheryl Sandberg wrote this book, and it's called Option B. I think that it talks about what it took for her to overcome the death of her husband. And I think she offers some pretty good advice. And one of the things that she talks about is when you confront a problem, somehow you seem to think it's going to always be there. And, it's like, oh, am I ever going to get rid of it? You have to realize that it doesn't persist. Things change and it will get better. It might get worse first, but it's going to get better. And so you have to convince yourself that it's going to get better, and that then you're going to take advantage of every little thing that happens to make it better. I mean, I remember growing up, I was really poor. I never had a new item of clothing until I was a model at the age of 18. And I just remember thinking, God, is it ever gonna happen? And then it did, and I always did whatever I could to try to make all this older clothing that I was getting kind of like from the Goodwill stores or wherever. So it looked fashionable, but you cannot give up hope. You have to realize that you will, if you persist and you realize it's not permanent, you can make it happen.
Was that something you learned from your parents, Esther, or was it through just early experiences throughout your childhood that you kind of came to that conclusion? Because I think talking to other founders, talking to other business owners, entrepreneurs, or a lot of people who are accomplished in different areas of life, people who have come to that solution either has experienced a lot of failures early on in their career, and then they realize, oh, everything's actually okay. The world didn't blow up. I'm still alive and breathing. Or they were raised like that. Or maybe it was a combination of certain events. Like what was that for you to reach that conclusion early on in your career quite quickly?
I think it was just, let's put it this way. There was only one alternative, because the other alternative, which was to give in and to be depressed and to not have it. I just decided I was going to have it. I wanted to have a better life. And the main thing that I wanted was to have a job where I had at least enough money so that I could have a place to live and food to eat and clothing, that I didn't have to, use clothing all the time. That was the main thing. And I saw other people around that had it. So I knew it wasn't out of my reach. It's just that, you had to figure out something entrepreneurial that you were going to do to reach that level. My crazy job earning 3 cents a word, I earned a lot of money. I earned thousands of dollars on 3 cents a word. And then with the modeling, and I don't know, I worked in a store as a sales clerk. Also, I earned, but I was also really frugal. I saw what it took to get there. And I just had almost like blinders on. I was like focused. I'm going to get there no matter what. And I mean, when I lived in South Central Los Angeles. For those of you that don't know, that's not a very good area. And, there were 4 people living in a 1-bedroom apartment. That's the kind of situation that I grew up in. And, it was not pleasant. So I know that you can make it out no matter what, if you believe in yourself and you work consistently. I even know that today in McDonald's around here in the Bay Area pays $21 an hour. So if you don't go out and spend your money, in crazy ways, and you know the value of saving, you can actually manage to get yourself out of that situation. Anyway, hopefully I answered your question, because I sort of went all over the place.
No, you definitely have. I think there's always 2 ways to look at things. I think it says a lot about a person who, whether you're living with limited means or difficulties, to be able to kind of still remain hopeful and grateful and positive, rather than just spiraling, right? Or just kind of feeling like, you're being dealt a bad card and that's all life is going to be. I think it just says a lot about the strength of your just mindset, and how focused you are, what exactly you want. You're crystal clear on your goals, and then you kind of take necessary steps to make it happen. For the audience that are very entrepreneurial, that are listening, you have a huge track record, Esther, of just starting a lot of exciting different types of projects. I think for a lot of people, just starting something is extremely terrifying. So do you have advice? What would your one advice be for people who want to start this business, side business, a nonprofit, freelancing, contracting, but they're just afraid to do it? Maybe it's too risky. Maybe it costs too much money. Maybe they feel like they're gonna, fall backwards relative to their peers. Like, what would your one advice be for folks in these situations?
So if you have a good idea, which is a lot of people have good ideas, but if you have a good idea, the most important thing is to get 1 or 2 other people that you can work with, because people don't really do a lot of great things alone. I think collaboration is the key, but in picking those other people, that is the key. Like 80 to 90% of startups fail. And the reason they fail is in the execution. It is not in the idea. The idea can be very good, and then they get into fights with the other people that are in their company, and then the whole thing falls apart. So I think it's important to pick carefully. And they're all over the country. There are these things called accelerators. And what they do is that they help you start your startup if you want to have one. They give you ideas. They tell you how to incorporate. They tell you how to get along with the other people. And the startups really, they address problems in society that we need a solution for. And if we didn't have startups, America would not be a very exciting place. As a matter of fact, I mean, it's one of the most creative countries on the planet, and it is because of our entrepreneurs. And we need those people to take that risk. But then, like I say, make sure you're going to work with somebody that you can trust and that it trusts you, because otherwise you're going to end up with problems. And I know, I've had a few startups already, so I know that it can be problematic.
What is your advice on finding like that right person or 2? Is it typically through your network? Is it through a certain, forum or event or app? Like if someone has an idea, they're like, wow, Esther, you're right. I need to be able to find at least, 1 other person. What would their next steps be?
Well, I think you meet these people at conferences. You can meet them at, I think, probably in schools. I mean, educational institutions are good places to meet other people. Also, if you're in a workplace and there are other people in your company that see an opportunity to do something that might be related but is different, you can also get people in the company that you're working with that might want to start up something.
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of accelerators and startup talk and pretty much all the universities. And also in junior colleges here in California, I don't know where everybody lives, I don't know if all the states have these junior colleges, but they offer an opportunity to find other people that might be interested in working on the same project. And these entrepreneurs can be doing anything from, making cookies that they can then sell to bakeries to, doing something with AI. They can be technical. There's so many opportunities out there, and everyone in their life has something that they know needs to be better and be changed. And so they just need to think about what it is that could be better in their life. And do other people in their community have the same need? And is that something that they can then help create or get or buy or whatever? I mean, I think in our world that is hammered by climate problems, I mean, we just have one climate issue after another. What could we do that would actually make a difference in our climate issues? And if you can think of something and that other people in your community could also participate in, that would make a difference in the climate, and it would make a difference in your community and make a difference to you too. And you can earn a living doing that. I think there are companies out there that, I mean, I think I've heard from one where they have little biographies of people that are making a lot of money by doing something simple, one thing. Those are actually all true. They're all true stories. And it's interesting to see what those people have done and how it's made a difference in their lives and the lives of other people with the product that they've created. I think another company that I worked with, it's called WeCare, WEECARE.io. And I first met this woman when she was a young mother. She still is a young mother, but now she has more kids. But she was looking for a daycare to put her kids in, and she couldn't find one. And then what she ended up doing is she started in-home daycares. So other mothers who were at home could take care of kids, maybe 5 or 6 at a time, earn a pretty good salary, and do a service for the women that were looking for daycare. And it's now, if you look it up online, it's now the largest one in the US, home daycares. And these are all just mothers who might have had 1 or 2 extra rooms in their house, maybe their family room, who knows where. And they take in toddlers that are, maybe, like I said, 5 or 6, and those kids get to play together, and it's a good experience for them. And those mothers that are working have a place where they feel comfortable to leave their child, and the woman that is taking care of them earns a good living. I mean, it's a win-win for everyone. So this is just an example of, she had a need and she tried to figure out a solution that would work for her, and then it works for other mothers. So, I mean, think about your life and what in your life could be better. And is there some way that you can help that happen for you and for your community?
I appreciate the advice. Another question I have is kind of like how we talked about parenting, your view on it, educators, your view on that. In your opinion, how are founders or leaders or managers kind of falling short when it comes to just leading or managing their teams?
Number one is that acronym I gave you, TRICK. The next book I'm writing is using TRICK in the corporate world or the business world, because they don't trust their employees, they don't respect their ideas, they don't give them a lot of independence, there's no collaboration, and they don't treat them with kindness. So all these employees want to quit. Yeah, I don't blame them. The great resignation, right? No one resigns from a company where they feel appreciated, even if the salary's low. That is one of the things that's so important. I mean, everybody should want to work together to make the product or the service function better. I mean, if you're hired at a company, hopefully that's your goal. Don't take a job at a company that you hate, because then you're not going to be able to work there very happily. But that's what I think leaders need to treat their employees with more trust and respect. And also, I think it's really important that it be more transparent. Let's put it that way, open. So decisions are made collaboratively. You don't have just one person coming down and telling everybody what to do, and it doesn't make sense. So I think it's really important to have a collaborative workspace where you feel trusted and respected. And having been early involved with Google, I can tell you one of the reasons why Google grew the way it did is because everybody who was working there felt trusted and respected. They followed the whole trick philosophy. And, if you didn't do something well, then you talk to your colleagues about it, and everybody works to make it better. And the company still functions with that philosophy. And you want employees that really care about your company and care about doing well, and that you, the employer, these are human beings. They have feelings and families and a life, and you want to treat them with respect, and not just, they're not objects. Let's put it that way. They're human beings, and they need to be treated with respect. I feel so strongly about that. That's my next book.
I can't wait to read it, because for someone, as you know, who works a lot in startups, founders, in recruiting, like I live and breathe this stuff, and hoping to kind of one day use what you learned, of course, with your chick through teaching or parenting when it comes to that stage in my personal life, but of course in my professional life, would love to always find ways to just better myself, just as a person, as a professional, as a manager, and as a leader. So I know that a lot of people in our audience certainly would be very much looking forward to the day your book goes live. So people who are curious, so what does a day-to-day look like in your life? Like what do you do? How do you structure your days? Is no day the same? What kind of keeps you inspired or excited to push forward and continue your ideas, start new ideas?
So I spend a lot of time with my former students who are now between the ages of 30 and 50. And or even a lot of them that I just retired in 2020. So some of them are in their early 20s. And I also, connect at Stanford University, where I work with a variety of students at Stanford. So my typical day starts with, I exercise every morning. I think it's really important. Of course, today it was pouring rain, so I had to change my plans. California, we have too much rain now. I mean, we all were dancing around for more rain, but we didn't expect it all to come at the same time. Anyway, then following my exercise, of course, I eat something, and then I'm usually on my computer. I have like a lot of Zoom meetings, and then I write blog posts, or I give talks, or I do podcasts just like I'm doing with you, or every day is something like that. And I work with, I think there are now 4 startups that I work with. And so I connect with all of them in one way or another. Takes time. Then on the weekends, I spend a lot of time with my family. All 3 of my daughters live close by, 5 minutes away. And then all my grandchildren, they're home for the holidays. I have some that are already in college, so they're not home, but they're home for the holidays. So, I'm pretty family oriented. So I spend a lot of time with them, and I spend a lot of time with my friends, and I travel a lot. I don't know if you've known that, so I give keynotes in all over the world. And so my next one is in the United Arab Emirates in Dubai. And then the rest of them this year, just in the spring, are going to be all over Europe. And then, I think that's the main one. And I have done keynotes, and I will be continuing in Mexico, Latin America, Brazil, Argentina, Peru, Chile. Anyway,
Wow, the
after
list goes
that,
on and on and on and
it
on.
goes
But
on and on.
you sure have a lot on your plate, and so certainly very, very grateful for everything. And I guess aside from the next book, would you be able to show the audience when that's slated to go live?
That probably would go live in a year, I
In a
would say.
year. And I
Yeah.
guess aside from your startups and your speaking engagements, are there anything else into the future, projects that you're certainly very excited about, perhaps in the next year or two, that you would like to also share?
I think primarily it's my startups. I have another startup where I'm focused on helping employers retain happy employees. So that's one of them. And then also with the first startup that I just did was Tracked, where it's peer-to-peer online learning. So I might be collaborating with some other startups on that. See, because sometimes you just can't do it alone. You need to have more people involved. I think mainly that's probably the main thing that I'm working on. Besides, also, I'm very concerned about climate issues, but I think we're all concerned about it. And then I'm not sure we're doing enough. I think we're sort of doing a little bit and hoping it'll work.
There's always more that we can do, but I guess just one more thought, whether it's climate or empowerment of the younger generation, to parenting, to even just applying your principles to the corporate world, and how to just foster just more fulfilling or creating more fulfilling and happy organization where people can be happy and more fulfilled. I think that's a very pertinent and just well timed, especially with your book coming out, because as you put it really well, like since 2020, the corporate world has gone through tons of ups and downs, right? Of course, even more recently in 2022, Great Recession, quiet quitting, people are now looking beyond just the salary and the titles, and they're looking for some place that would excite them, just on an external, internal level, that would just be an organization that would fulfill them, that they can feel respected and listened to. And so I think a lot more of this chatter is just happening, and it's going to continue to just happen more and more as we kind of go into the future. So I think the startups that you're working on, to retaining good talent, to your book on how we can kind of apply your methodology to have more of a successful, fulfilling career, and creating more of a happy and engaged kind of workforce is certainly something that I feel there needs to be more content around that. So I think that's great. I think I'm personally looking forward to it, as it's very kind of relevant to my own career with the founders and talent that we work with. And I can't wait to see when it comes out.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that enthusiastic response, because I'm very happy to hear that, yeah, you think it's going to be a good idea. I'm excited about it. And I look forward to, I'm going to be doing a lot of interviewing, and then I'll have to write it all up. It'll be a lot of work, but worth it.
I'm sure it is. Well, a great way to always end our podcast is by asking you just one more question, Esther. So for someone that's listening who would love to just follow in your footsteps, whether it's having a successful career, being a successful parent, starting companies, working on things that really excite and genuinely kind of inspires you, like what would be your biggest advice to the audience?
Well, my biggest advice would be to follow my trick philosophy in all aspects of your life, especially with the person that you're living with, whether, whatever your relationship is with them. Everybody wants to be trusted and respected. And I think one of the first things that happens in relationships, personal relationships, is that the respect disappears. And then that's followed by loss of trust. And then you start, spying on your significant other. And then there's less independence, and the whole thing crumbles. So I think it's important to apply those principles in all areas of your life. And you will feel better yourself about it, and so will whoever it is you're living with feel better about themselves. So that's my advice. And yes,
I love it. I absolutely love it. That's a fitting way to end. And for people who want to reach out to you, Esther, for any advice, for people who want to maybe participate or visit one of your keynote talks into the future, where can they reach you? Where can they find out more information about you?
I think, I am on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter. I'm also on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I'm literally all over the place. I would say if they wanted to find out more information or if they want to arrange for anything, I have a website that is raisesuccessfulpeople.com. And then on that website, there's a way to contact me. So I think that would probably be the easiest.
Perfect.
I'm very happy and thankful for this interview. I thought you asked really great questions, Preston. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Esther. It means a lot. And just thank you again for willing to be open and honest and sharing personal experiences, to opening up and being transparent about your early days being as a journalist, an educator, and how you're able to grow that and how you're able to really apply your philosophy in parenting now to business, and not to mention all the other amazing things, mission-oriented things that you're working on that we don't have enough time for. Like you said, we could talk about hours about AI, we can talk hours about parenting. Just wanted to do my best to be able to show with the limited time that we have a lot of the great things that you've worked on, and of course, a lot of the fantastic things that we can look forward to that you and the team will be putting forward into the future. So thank you again. I'm very, very grateful, and just I admire you and thankful for your time. And you inspire a lot of people, and I'm sure you have done so with our audience as well. And I would definitely want to do whatever I can to keep in touch and to root for you and the projects and ventures, and hoping to maybe one day meet. I think that'd be absolutely fantastic. But we're shooting this in the beginning of a brand new year. We survived 2022, Esther, and I'm hopeful and positive that with your just mindset and with your focus and drive, that you can have a very wildly successful year. And we will do whatever we can to root from you from the sidelines.
Thank you so much, and looking forward to meeting you in person sometime.
Thank you. Feeling would be mutual, and I appreciate your time, Esther, and we'll certainly keep in touch, and wishing you a wonderful 2023.
Thank you. You too.
Thank
All
you.
the best.